My name is Harper Hudson, and at 34 years old, I had mastered the art of being invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night in November, under the crystal lights of Hawthorne Crest. But to understand why that night shattered my composure, you have to understand the soil in which the Hudson family tree was planted. We lived in Cedar Vale, a suburb that looked less like a neighborhood and more like a brochure for the American dream, curated by someone who had never actually lived it. It was a place where the grass was cut to a uniform 2 inches, where the garbage cans were hidden behind lattice screens, and where silence was considered the highest form of etiquette. In Cedar Vale, you did not scream, you did not cry, and you certainly did not talk about money. You simply had it, or in the case of the women in my house, you simply married it. My father, Graham Hudson, was the chief financial officer of the Ridgeway Meridian Group. He was a man who viewed the world entirely through the lens of asset allocation. To him, affection was a finite resource, and like any good investor, he believed in putting his capital where it would yield the highest return. In the economy of our household, my brother Ethan was the growth stock. I was the depreciating asset. It was not that my father was cruel in the traditional, cinematic sense. He never hit us. He rarely raised his voice. His cruelty was administrative. It was the cruelty of a man who looks at a spreadsheet and decides which department to cut funding to. I remember being 10 years old and watching Ethan struggle with long division at the kitchen table. He was red-faced, frustrated, snapping his pencil in half. My father did not scold him. Instead, the next day, a private tutor named Mr. Henderson arrived in a shiny sedan. Mr. Henderson came 3 times a week, costing my father $200 an hour, when Ethan finally managed to scrape a C+ on his math final. My father took him out for a steak dinner to celebrate his perseverance. 2 weeks later, I brought home a report card with straight A's. I placed it on the granite countertop, right next to my father's Scotch glass, waiting for the praise that I was sure I had earned. Graham glanced at it. He took a sip of his drink and flipped the page over without smiling. "Do not be arrogant, Harper," he said, his voice level and uninterested. "Nobody likes a girl who thinks she is the smartest person in the room. It is unbecoming." That was the rule. Ethan's mediocrity was a hurdle to be overcome with money and support. My excellence was a character flaw that needed to be suppressed. My mother, Marion, was the lubricant that kept this machine running without squeaking. She was a woman who had traded her personality for security. Her entire existence was dedicated to keeping the peace, which was code for ensuring Graham never had to deal with an uncomfortable emotion. If I cried because Ethan broke my toys, she would tell me to hush because Daddy was on a call. If I complained that Ethan got the new car while I was taking the bus, she would smooth my hair and tell me that life was not a competition, even though in our house, it absolutely was. The disparity grew sharper as we got older. It became a physical thing, like a wall being built brick by brick between my brother and me. Ethan turned 16 and got a brand new Mustang. I turned 16 and got a lecture on how to be a gracious passenger. Ethan got caught drinking behind the school bleachers, and my father hired a lawyer to make sure it did not stain his record. Calling it boys being boys, when I asked to join the debate team, my father told me it would make me argumentative and hard to marry. I learned to stop asking. I learned to hoard my achievements like contraband. I took extra shifts at the local library, stacking books and reading about forensic accounting and law in the quiet corners of the break room. I opened a savings account that my parents did not know about, depositing $15 here, $20 there. I realized early on that if I wanted a lifeline, I would have to braid it myself. But the breaking point, the moment that truly severed the cord, happened the spring of my senior year. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was roast beef night, and the smell of rosemary and rendered fat always made the air in the dining room feel heavy. We were seated at the mahogany table. My mother was picking at her salad. Ethan was texting under the table, a smirk playing on his lips. My father cleared his throat, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I have made a decision regarding next year," Graham announced. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and looked at Ethan. "I have secured a spot for you at the prestigious Crestwood University. I pulled some strings with the board. The tuition is steep, $45,000 a year, plus living expenses, but we are going to cover it, all of it." Ethan looked up, grinning. "Awesome. Thanks, Dad." "It is an investment," Graham said, pointing a fork at him. "You are going to study business. You are going to build networks. You are the future of this name. Ethan, we need you prepared." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been waiting for the right time to bring up my own news, and this felt like the only opening I would get. "Dad," I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous room, "I got into state. The acceptance letter came today." My father turned his head slowly, as if surprised I was still there. "State, that is nice. Harper." "It is a great program," I pressed, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. "They have one of the best pre-law tracks in the country." I was hoping well. I was looking at the financial aid package, and it covers about half. If you could help with the other half, just for the first 2 years, I could work to pay off the rest. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother stopped chewing. Ethan let out a short, derisive snort. Graham set his fork down. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, the way one might look at a dog that keeps barking at a door that will never open. "Harper," he said, sighing, "we have talked about this." "We have not," I said. "We have talked about Ethan. We never talk about me." "Because there is nothing to discuss," he said. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. "Look at the numbers. Harper, I am a businessman. I look at ROI, return on investment. I am a good investment," I argued, my voice trembling. "I have a 4.0 GPA. I have never asked you for anything. I can do this." He shook his head, a small, patronizing smile touching his lips. "It is not about your grades, sweetheart. It is about reality. You are a pretty girl. You have your mother's grace. You do not need a law degree to be happy. In fact, a degree like that, it intimidates men. It complicates things." I felt cold, a deep, marrow-seeping chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am not going to throw good money after bad," Graham said, his voice hardening. "Ethan needs this degree to lead a company. You need to learn how to host a dinner party. You need to learn how to support a husband who leads a company." "So that is it?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "You are paying for his entire future, and I get nothing because I am a girl." "You get a roof over your head," my father snapped. "You get clothes on your back. Do not play the victim. It is ugly. I am telling you the truth because I love you. You do not need degrees. Harper, you just need to find a husband." He went back to cutting his roast beef, the knife scraping against the porcelain plate with a screech that sounded like a scream. My mother reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Eat your dinner, Harper," she whispered. "Please, do not ruin the night." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years erasing herself to fit into the negative space beside my father, and I saw my future in her empty eyes. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply nodded. "Okay," I said, and I meant it. It was okay. Because in that moment, the hope I had been nurturing, the foolish, childish hope that if I just worked hard enough, they would see me, finally died, and with its death came a strange, terrifying freedom. I finished my dinner, I cleared the table, and then I went upstairs and started packing. I did not leave that night. I was practical. I needed money. Over the next 3 months, I became a ghost in my own house. I stopped talking at dinner. I stopped showing them my grades. I worked double shifts at a warehouse on the edge of town. A place my father would never be caught dead in. That was where I met Stuart. Stuart Harmon was 20 years old, driving a beat-up truck and working the loading dock to pay for his EMT certification. He was not like the boys in Cedar Vale. He did not wear polo shirts or talk about his father's stock portfolio. He had calluses on his hands and grease under his fingernails. I was sitting on a pallet of dog food in the back of the warehouse during my break, reading a battered textbook on criminal psychology. Stuart walked by, carrying a crate of motor oil. He stopped and looked at the book, then at me. "Light reading?" he asked. "Planning a murder," I joked. Not looking up. He laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that seemed to crack the air around me. He sat down on a stack of tires opposite me. "You are the girl from the hill, right?" he asked. "The one with the big white house." "I live there," I said, marking my page. "I am not from there." He looked at me for a long moment. He did not look at my clothes or my hair. He looked at the dark circles under my eyes and the tension in my jaw. "You look like you are trying to escape a prison," he said quietly. It was the first time anyone had ever seen me. Not the reflection of my father's status, not the disappointing daughter, but me. "I am working on it," I said. "Well," Stuart said, standing up and dusting off his jeans, "if you need a getaway driver, I have a truck. It is ugly, but it runs." We started eating lunch together every day. I learned that Stuart wanted to be a firefighter because he wanted to be the person who ran in when everyone else was running out. He wanted to save things. I realized, with a jolt, that I wanted to be the person who found out who started the fire in the first place. We were two sides of the same coin: restoration and justice. 6 weeks after graduation, on a humid Tuesday morning, I waited until my father's Mercedes pulled out of the driveway and my mother went to her garden club. I did not take much, just my clothes, my books, and the $3,000 I had saved in cash. I left the expensive jewelry my father had bought me for appearances. I left the dresses my mother had picked out to make me look marriageable. I walked out the front door and down the long, manicured driveway. I did not look back at the house. I knew that if I turned around, I might turn into a pillar of salt. Or worse, I might convince myself to stay. Stuart was waiting at the end of the block in his rusted pickup truck. The engine was idling, a rough, sputtering rhythm that sounded like music to me. He reached over and opened the passenger door. "You got everything?" "I have everything I own," I said, throwing my suitcase into the back. "Where to?" he asked as I climbed in. "Anywhere," I said. "Just drive." As we pulled away from Cedar Vale, watching the white fences blur into a continuous line of exclusion, I made a silent vow. My father had told me I was a bad investment. He had told me I had no value unless I was attached to a man. I stared at my reflection in the side mirror, watching the house disappear. Fine, I thought, if you cannot value me, then you will never be able to afford me. I was not going to be their daughter anymore. I was going to be a reckoning. But as I sat in that truck, holding Stuart's hand, I had no idea that 16 years later, my father would find a way to drag me back into his ledger. I had no idea that while I was building a life on truth, he was building a fortune on a lie that bore my name. I thought I had escaped, but in the Hudson family, no asset is ever truly written off. It is just hidden until it is needed. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones of people who are trying to outrun their origins. It is not the tiredness of a long workout or a bad night's sleep. It is a vibrating, low-frequency hum that says, if you stop moving, you will sink. For the first 4 years after I left Cedar Vale, I did not stop moving. The husband my father said I needed turned out to be a partner, not a provider. Stuart and I married at the courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Wearing jeans and clean shirts, we did not do it for the tax break or the romance of a white wedding. We did it to build a fortress. A marriage license was a legal wall that said, "This is my family now, not you." But walls cost money to maintain. My father's voice lived in my head. "You do not need degrees." I made it my daily ritual to prove him wrong. One shift at a time. I enrolled in community college first, paying per credit hour with crumpled tips from my waitress apron. My schedule was a jigsaw puzzle of survival. 4 in the morning to noon, the breakfast shift at Dina's Diner, pouring endless cups of weak coffee for truckers and hungover college kids. My hands smelled perpetually of syrup and bleach. 1 in the afternoon to 4 classes: Introduction to Criminal Justice, Accounting 1, Psychology. I sat in the back row, wearing my diner uniform, forcing my eyes to stay open as the professor droned on about tort law. 5 to 9. A nap in my car, usually curled up in the back seat with a textbook as a pillow, or studying in the library until my vision blurred. 10 at night to 3 in the morning, the graveyard shift at a call center, answering phones for an insurance company. I listened to people scream about deductibles and car accidents, while I highlighted case studies on fraud detection. Stuart was fighting his own battles. He had made it into the fire academy, a grueling physical gauntlet that left him bruised and exhausted every single day. We were like 2 ships passing in a very small, very cheap apartment. We had a rule, written on a sticky note on our refrigerator: no parents, no loans, no surrender. We lived on rice, beans, and the discount bakery rack. There were months when the electricity bill was a terrifying document. I remember one November when our heating broke. We could not afford the repairman, so we slept in the living room under 5 blankets, seeing our breath in the air. "We could ask them," Stuart whispered one night, his arm heavy over my waist. "Just for a loan to fix the furnace. Your dad has it." "No," I said, my teeth chattering. "If I take $1, they own $1's worth of my decisions. I would rather freeze." "You are stubborn," he said, kissing the back of my neck. "I am motivated," I corrected. I transferred to the state university 2 years later. I took out student loans. I signed the papers with a shaking hand, looking at the interest rate: 6%, 7%. It was terrifying. To my father, debt was leverage. To me, it was a chain, but it was a chain I chose. Unlike the invisible strings attached to his money, I graduated summa cum laude, but I did not walk at the ceremony. I could not afford the cap and gown rental fee, and I had a shift at the warehouse. My diploma arrived in the mail in a cardboard tube. I put it in a drawer. I did not need the applause. I needed the job. I found my calling in the silence between numbers. I realized that money always leaves a trail. People lie. They lie about where they were, who they love, and what they want. But bank accounts are brutally honest. Every transaction is a confession. I applied to the Meriton Financial Crimes Unit. It was a long shot. They hired ex-feds, forensic accountants with 20 years of experience, not 24-year-olds with a degree from a state school and a resume that included waitress and forklift operator. But during the interview, the unit chief, a grizzled woman named Captain Varese, threw a stack of files on the table. "This is a dummy file for a money laundering case," she said, leaning back and crossing her arms. "You have 10 minutes. Find the leak." I opened the file. It was a mess of shell companies and offshore transfers. But as I scanned the ledgers, I saw it. It was not in the big numbers. It was in the petty cash. Small, consistent withdrawals from 3 different subsidiaries, all under the threshold for automatic reporting, all happening on Fridays. "Here," I said, pointing to the line item. "The consultant fees. They are structuring the withdrawals to avoid the $10,000 trigger, and the consultant shares an address with the CEO's sister-in-law." Varese raised an eyebrow. "How did you spot that so fast?" "Because," I said, thinking of my mother's grocery money that she hid in a coffee can, and my father's business trips that never had an itinerary. "I know what it looks like when someone is trying to hide a habit within a budget." I got the job. The work was unglamorous. It was not like the movies with gunfights and chases. It was hours of staring at screens, cross-referencing tax IDs, and interviewing people who were terrified or furious. I learned to talk to victims. I sat in living rooms with elderly couples who had lost their pensions to scammers. I sat in boardrooms with nervous whistleblowers, and I realized something strange. My childhood had been a training camp. When I interviewed a CEO who was embezzling funds, I recognized the tone of voice immediately. It was the same tone my father used, the condescending, "I am smarter than you" cadence that assumed I would not understand the complexity of his genius. When I spoke to the wives who signed fraudulent tax returns because their husbands told them it is just paperwork, I recognized the fear in their eyes. It was my mother's fear, the fear of rocking the boat, the fear that asking a question would cause the roof to cave in. I was good at my job because I had lived in the wreckage of these dynamics my whole life. I could hear the lie before it was spoken. I could smell the arrogance of a man who thinks he is untouchable. I rose through the ranks quickly. Junior investigator, senior analyst, lead investigator. I busted a charity fraud ring in the suburbs. I took down a real estate developer who was building condos with imaginary capital. With every case I closed, I felt a layer of my father's voice peeling away. You do not need degrees. Well, this degree just put a corrupt millionaire in handcuffs. Dad, but I never told them. I never called home to brag about my promotion. I never sent them a clipping of the newspaper article that mentioned Agent Hudson. Because I knew them. If I told my mother, she would say, "That is nice, dear, but do you have to work with criminals? It sounds dangerous." She would reduce my career to a safety hazard. If I told my father, he would ask about my salary. If it was low, he would sneer. If it was high, he would take credit. He would tell his golf buddies, "Yes, Harper is in finance. She gets her head for numbers from me." I refused to give them the raw material for their narrative. My success was the only thing I owned completely. It was the one room in my life they did not have a key to. So, when we visited for holidays, which was rare, I kept it vague. "I work for the state," I would say. "Administrative work, data entry." They believed it because they wanted to believe it. It fit their worldview. Of course Harper was a low-level clerk. Of course she was pushing paper while Ethan was out conquering the world. It made them comfortable. And Ethan was failing upward. While I was building cases, Ethan was building a facade. He bounced from startup to startup, funded by my father's angel investments. He launched a tech company that never produced an app. He started a luxury import business that imported nothing but debt. Every time he failed, my father reframed it. It was never "Ethan went bankrupt." It was, the market was not ready for Ethan's vision. It was a learning experience for the next big thing. I watched this from a distance, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Relief that I was not part of that suffocating safety net. Anger that the net existed at all. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 10 years into my career. I was sitting at my desk at the unit, surrounded by stacks of subpoenas for a healthcare fraud case. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I hesitated before answering. Calls from Marion Hudson usually meant she needed an emotional dumpster to unload her anxiety into before my father got home. "Hello, Mom," I said, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear as I typed. "Harper," she said, breathless. "Great news. Ethan is getting married." I paused my typing. "Oh, that is wow. Who is she?" "Her name is Natalie," Mom gushed. "She is lovely, very poised. Her family is in logistics. Your father is thrilled. He says this is the match that is going to cement everything." Cement everything? Not make Ethan happy? Not bring love into his life? Cement the legacy. "That is great. Mom," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. "When is the wedding?" "Oh, not for a while, but the engagement party is next month. At Hawthorne Crest? It is going to be huge. A launch party for Ethan's new venture, too." "Right," I said. "Two birds, one stone. You will come, won't you?" Her voice took on that pleading edge. "And Stuart, we need the whole family there, for the photos." "For the photos? Not because they missed me, because a missing sister leaves a gap in the visual evidence of a perfect family." "I will have to check Stuart's shift schedule," I said, "but I will try." "Good," she said. Then, her tone shifted. It dropped lower, becoming serious. "Harper, honey, one more thing." "What?" "When you come, try to dress up a little, and please, just do not talk about your work. I gripped the phone tighter. My work. You mean my data entry job? Yes, she said, oblivious to the sarcasm. Your father is inviting some very important investors. We do not want to bore them with bureaucracy. Just say you are supporting your husband. It sounds better. I closed my eyes. I was a 34-year-old woman. I was a lead investigator for the state. I had put away bad guys who had more money in their glove compartments than my father had in his checking account. But to her, I was still the girl who needed to be edited out of the conversation. Sure, Mom, I said, my voice flat. I will be quiet. I would not want to ruin the investment. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the ringing of phones around me. I looked at the file on my desk, evidence of a man who had stolen pensions from teachers to buy a yacht. I realized then that I was going to go to that party. Not for the photos, not for Ethan. I was going because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to see the success my father had bought for Ethan. I wanted to stand in that room, knowing what I knew about the world, and see if their shiny golden lives could withstand the gaze of someone who knew how to spot a fake. I did not know yet that the fake was not just Ethan's career. I did not know that the fake was my own name, signed on a dotted line I had never seen. I packed up my files. I texted Stuart. They are having a party. We are going. He texted back immediately. Do I need to bring the fire axe? No. I typed. Just the truth. But as it turned out, the truth was the one thing that family was not prepared to handle. 3 days before the engagement party at Hawthorne Crest. My phone rang. It was 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I was in my living room, folding laundry while half watching a documentary on cold case DNA evidence. Stuart was in the garage, tinkering with the engine of our lawnmower. The house was quiet, filled with the comfortable, unpretentious silence of a life we had built with our own hands. When I saw the caller ID, the peace fractured. Mom. I knew exactly why she was calling at this hour. My father played golf on Saturday afternoons. He would be on the back nine at the country club, phone on silent, focused on his swing and his networking. This was Marion Hudson's window of opportunity. It was the only time she felt safe enough to speak to me without a script, or so she thought. I picked up the phone. Hello, Mom. Harper, she breathed. Her voice was low, hurried, echoing slightly as if she were in a large, empty room. I imagined her in the master bedroom walk-in closet, hiding among the rows of my father's tailored suits. Are you alone? I am in my living room, I said, putting down a towel. Is everything okay? Yes, everything is fine, she said, though her tone suggested a bomb defusal operation. I just wanted to call to check on the logistics for Tuesday. You are still coming, right? I said I would, I replied. I took the afternoon off work. Good. She paused, and I could hear the nervous intake of breath. Listen, honey, I wanted to talk to you about how we are going to handle things. Handle things? I asked, my guard going up. It is a party. Mom, not a hostage negotiation. What is there to handle? You know what I mean, she said, her voice dropping to a plea. Your father, he is very stressed. This merger, this launch for Ethan, it is crucial. The investors coming on Tuesday are old school. They are conservative men. They value stability, hierarchy. I am stable, I said, keeping my voice even. I have had the same job for 10 years. I have been married to the same man for 8. I know, she said quickly, soothingly. But it is not that kind of stability. It is about the image. Harper, please, just do not make things awkward. I walked over to the window. Outside, a squirrel was running along the power line. I focused on it, trying to keep my heart rate down. Awkward, I repeated. You mean by existing? Don't be dramatic, she said. I just mean keep the conversation light. Ask people about their golf game. Compliment the wives on their jewelry. And for heaven's sake, Harper, If anyone asks what you do, just keep it simple. Say you work for the state. Leave it at that. Something in me snapped. It was a small snap, like a dry twig under a boot, but it was loud in the silence of my kitchen. "Mom," I said, "do you know what I do?" The line went dead silent. "What?" she asked weakly. "Do you actually know what I do for a living?" I pressed. "I mean, really know. Not the version Dad tells people. Not the clerical work version. Do you know what my title is?" "Harper, this is not the time." "I am a lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Unit," I said. I did not shout. I spoke the words with the precision of a sworn testimony. Last month, I led a task force that recovered $3 million in stolen state pension funds. I supervise a team of 12 agents. I testify in federal court. Do you know that? The silence on the other end stretched out, heavy and suffocating. "Yes," she whispered finally. The single word hit me harder than any insult. She knew. She had always known. "You know," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "So why do you let him lie? Why do you let him tell people I file papers?" "Because he does not want to hear it. Harper." Her voice cracked. A sudden burst of frantic energy. "He does not want to hear that you are out there chasing criminals. It scares him. It challenges him. He wants to believe you are safe. He wants to believe you are manageable." "Manageable?" I echoed. "Is that what I'm supposed to be?" "You know how he is," she said, retreating back into her shell of excuses. "He is from a different time. He thinks a woman in that line of work is hard, unhappy. If he tells people you are an admin, it makes sense to him. It fits the world he understands. Why can't you just let him have that? It costs you nothing." "It costs me my reality," I said. "It is just one night," she begged. "Please, Harper, for me. If you go in there talking about indictments and fraud, he will get sour. He will take it out on Ethan. He will take it out on me. Just be soft. Can you do that? Be soft for 3 hours." I looked down at my hands. They were strong hands. Hands that had dug through dumpsters for shredded documents. Hands that had handcuffed men twice my size. "I will come," I said, cold and final. "But I am not coming to perform. Mom, I am coming to watch." I hung up before she could say thank you. I stood there, gripping the phone, feeling the familiar burn of injustice. It was fascinating. Really, in the Hudson household, protection was a currency, but it was distributed with wild inequality. Ethan was protected from failure. Every time he stumbled, my father was there with a checkbook to pave the road, to buy the net, to rewrite the story so that Ethan was never the loser, only the victim of circumstance. I, on the other hand, was protected from success. My achievements were hidden, buried, erased, because my competence was viewed as a threat. If I was successful without their help, it proved they were unnecessary. And to a narcissist like Graham Hudson, being unnecessary was a fate worse than death. The back door opened, and Stuart walked in. He was wiping grease from his hands with a red rag, sweat sticking his t-shirt to his chest. He took one look at my face and stopped. "Marion," he asked. "Marion," I confirmed. He tossed the rag onto the counter and walked over to me. He did not hug me immediately. He knew I needed space when I was like this. He leaned against the island, crossing his arms. "What is the rule for this time?" he asked. "No talking politics, no breathing too loudly." "I am supposed to be soft," I said bitterly. "I am supposed to pretend I'm a secretary, so Dad does not feel emasculated by the fact that his daughter carries a badge." Stuart let out a short, dry laugh. "He would not last an hour in your world. Harper, you eat guys like him for breakfast." "Mom says he does not want to hear it," I said, looking at the floor. "She says it disrupts the peace." Stuart stepped closer then. He put a hand under my chin and tilted my face up. His eyes were kind, but hard. "Harper, listen to me. You do not go there to get their permission to be who you are. You already are who you are. You earned it, every single inch of it." "I know," I said. But it still hurts. It is stupid. But it hurts. It is not stupid, he said. It is your family. But here is the thing. You can go to this party if you want. If you need to see it, go. But you do not shrink. You hear me? You do not make yourself small just so they can feel big. You walk in there as Harper Hudson, the woman who pays her own mortgage and catches bad guys. If they cannot handle that, that is their failure, not yours. I am going, I said. I have to. Why? Because, I said, realizing it as I spoke. I need to know if I am still afraid of them. I need to know if the wire is still there. Tuesday arrived with a sky the color of a bruise. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the dress I had laid out on the bed. It was a simple black sheath dress, no sequins, no lace, no flash. My mother would have wanted me in pastels. She would have wanted ruffles, something that signaled sweetness and compliance. My father would have wanted something expensive and branded, a logo he could point to as proof of his generosity. I chose black. It was the color of authority. It was the color of a judge's robe. I put it on. It fit perfectly. I pulled my hair back into a low, sleek bun. I applied makeup sparingly, just enough to look polished, not enough to look like I was trying to seduce an heir. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like Ethan's sister. I did not look like Graham's daughter. I looked like myself. I walked over to my jewelry box. I bypassed the pearl necklace my parents had given me for my 18th birthday, the one that came with a lecture about purity. Instead, I reached for the small enamel pin on my dresser, the scales of justice. I hesitated. Mom had said, "Be soft." Wearing this was a quiet act of rebellion. It was a tiny metal middle finger to their narrative. I pinned it to my lapel. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Marion. Address Hawthorne Crest Country Club, 1500 Skyline Drive. Valet is prepaid. Then, a second text bubbled up immediately after. Your father invited the chairman of the board. Please remember what we discussed. Do not embarrass him. He loves you. I stared at the screen. He loves you. It was the ultimate silencer. In my family, love was not a feeling. It was a hostage situation. It was a weapon used to enforce compliance. If you love us, you will lie for us. If you love us, you will disappear for us. I realized then that for Graham and Marion Hudson, honor was a physical structure, like a house, and to keep the structure standing. They were willing to brick me up inside the walls. They valued the reputation of the family more than the actual human beings within it. I picked up my purse. I checked for my keys, my ID, and my credit cards, my own cards, with my own limits, paid with my own money. "Ready?" Stuart asked from the doorway. He was in his uniform, holding his helmet. He had to head straight to the station for a 24-hour shift. "I think so," I said. "I wish I could go with you," he said, his brow furrowed. "I do not like you walking into the lion's den alone." "It is not a lion's den," I said, forcing a smile. "It is just a country club. The worst thing that can happen is lukewarm shrimp and a few passive-aggressive comments." "If you feel disrespected," Stuart said, repeating the line he had said 1,000 times, "you leave immediately." "I know. I mean it. Harper, you owe them nothing." He kissed me, hard and quick, a transfer of strength. "Call me when you get out." "I will." I watched him drive away in his truck. Then I walked to my own car. As I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, I felt a strange sense of calm. I told myself I was going there as an observer. I was going to sip sparkling water, smile at the engagement, and leave. I was going to prove to myself that their opinion no longer held any weight. I was going to walk in as an adult. I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the wealthy side of town, toward the hill that overlooked the city. I did not know that I was driving toward a crime scene. I did not know that the silence I had agreed to keep was about to be shattered by a notification on my phone. I did not know that the price of admission to Hawthorne Crest was going to be $50,000 of my own future. I merged onto the highway, the rain starting to speckle my windshield. I turned on the radio to drown out the voice of my mother in my head. Don't embarrass him. I gripped the steering wheel. I won't embarrass him. I thought, but I am done protecting him. The road ahead was dark, and the lights of the country club were waiting. I drove toward them, unsuspecting, like a moth flying toward a bug zapper, thinking it was just a star. The velvet rope at the entrance of the Hawthorne Crest Country Club was not just a crowd control measure. It was a physical manifestation of the line my family had drawn between themselves and the rest of the world. I stood before it, clutching my small black clutch, feeling the damp night air cling to my skin. The security guard was a man whose neck was wider than his head, squeezed into a tuxedo that looked uncomfortable. He held a tablet with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious texts. "Name?" he asked, not looking up. The blue light of the screen illuminated his bored expression. "Harper Hudson," I said. He scrolled. His thick finger tapped the screen. Dragging down, then up, then down again, the silence stretched out, punctuated only by the distant, muffled sound of a jazz trumpet escaping through the double doors. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were flat, practiced in the art of rejection. "I do not have a Harper Hudson on the list." I felt a cold smirk touch my lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of confirmation. "Check under Graham Hudson's party," I suggested. "I am his daughter." He checked again. He shook his head. "Mr. Hudson has listed a Marion Hudson and an Ethan Hudson. There are no other family members authorized." There it was. The administrative erasure. It was one thing to feel unwelcome. It was another to be bureaucratically deleted. My father had not just forgotten to invite me. He had ensured that even if I showed up, I would be stopped at the border. It was a power move. He wanted me to have to ask for permission to enter his world. "Is there a problem?" The voice came from behind the heavy oak doors. My mother slipped out, looking like a deer caught in headlights. If the deer was wearing vintage Chanel and diamonds the size of grapes, she saw me, then she saw the guard, and her face went through a complex gymnastics routine of shame, panic, and performative grace. "It is fine, Arthur," she said to the guard. Her voice pitched a little too high. She is with me. It was a last-minute addition." "I need to log her." "Mrs. Hudson," the guard said, following protocol. "What should I put down as her relation?" My mother hesitated. She looked at me, her daughter, who had the same nose, the same chin, and then she looked back at the guard. She could not say daughter. That would raise questions about why the daughter was not on the list. "She is a distant relative," my mother said. "A cousin, from out of town. Put her down as a +1. I did not argue. I did not correct her. I simply catalogued it. Exhibit A. The denial of biological fact to preserve social standing. "Go on in," the guard said, unhooking the rope. I walked past him, stepping into the warmth of the lobby. My mother gripped my elbow, her fingers digging into my arm with surprising strength. "Thank you for not making a scene," she whispered, her breath smelling of mints and anxiety. "Your father is already on edge. The chairman of the board is here. Just blend in. Harper, please." I am a master of blending in. "Mom," I said, pulling my arm free. "I have had 34 years of practice." She flinched, but she did not have time to unpack the guilt. She smoothed her dress, put on her society smile, a terrifying transformation that happened in the blink of an eye and swept into the ballroom. I followed her, but I kept my distance. The ballroom was a study in aggressive luxury. The chandeliers were so large they looked like frozen explosions. The tables were draped in heavy linens, topped with floral arrangements that likely cost more than my first car. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume. Roast beef and old money. I moved to the perimeter, taking a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter who looked as tired as I felt. From the edge of the room, I watched the ecosystem of the Hudson world. It was a shark tank where everyone pretended to be goldfish. My father was in the center of the room, near the ice sculpture. He was holding court, surrounded by 3 men in gray suits who listened to him with rapt attention. Graham Hudson was in his element. He was gesturing broadly, his laugh booming over the music. He looked vital, powerful, and completely untroubled by the fact that he had just tried to bar his own child from the building. And there was Ethan. My brother was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo with a black lapel. He looked the part. He looked like the young, dynamic entrepreneur my father was selling him as. He was talking to a woman with silver hair, leaning in with a charm that I knew was rehearsed in front of a mirror. I drifted closer, keeping a large floral arrangement between us, employing the surveillance techniques I used on stakeouts. "It is all about scalability," Ethan was saying, his voice confident. "We are looking at a 300% growth in the first quarter. The logistics are already in place. It is just a matter of turning the key." "Fascinating," the woman said. "And your father is backing the initial round." "Fully," Ethan said, beaming. "He believes in the vision. We are keeping it in the family to ensure quality control." I took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. Quality control. Ethan had never controlled the quality of anything in his life. He had failed 3 math classes in high school and wrecked 2 cars in college. The only thing he was good at was spending money that wasn't his. "Harper." The voice was cool, feminine, and unexpected. I turned. Standing a few feet away was the bride-to-be. Natalie Breyer was not what I expected. My mother had described her as lovely and poised, which usually meant quiet and decorative. But up close, Natalie had an edge. She was beautiful. Yes, dark hair pulled back tight, a dress that was architectural and severe, but her eyes were not the eyes of a woman blindly in love. They were the eyes of a woman who checked the exits when she entered a room. "Hello," I said. "You must be Natalie." "And you must be the sister," she said. She did not offer a hand. She just studied me. "Ethan said you might not make it." "I almost didn't," I said. The guest list was a little exclusive. A flicker of something crossed her face. "I organized the guest list," she said slowly. "I asked Ethan for your name 3 times. He said you were traveling. He said you were unavailable." "I live 20 minutes away," I said. Natalie looked at me. Really looked at me. She was assessing the discrepancy. She was realizing that the man she was about to marry had lied about something trivial, which meant he would lie about things that mattered. "I see," she said. Her voice was neutral, but her grip on her champagne flute tightened. Before we could continue, a shadow fell over us. Harper. My father appeared, his arm draped around the shoulders of a man I recognized from the business pages, some venture capital tycoon. Graham's smile was wide, fixed, and did not reach his eyes. "I did not think you would make it," Graham said, his tone implying that he had hoped I wouldn't. He turned to the tycoon. "Bill, this is Harper, my daughter." "Pleasure," Bill said, extending a hand. "I was just hearing about Ethan's new venture. Are you involved in the business as well?" My father answered before I could inhale. "Oh, no, Graham laughed, a dismissive sound. "Harper is not cut out for the high-stakes world. She is more of a homebody. She works for the state, very low-key. We like to let her live her quiet life, don't we, sweetheart?" He squeezed my shoulder. It was not a hug. It was a restraint. "Actually," I began, "I work in—" "She is very private," Graham interrupted, talking over me as if I were a television set he could mute. "Now, Bill, about that mezzanine financing you mentioned." He physically turned his back on me, steering Bill away toward the bar. The interaction had lasted less than 30 seconds. I had been introduced, categorized as irrelevant, and discarded. I stood there, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. It was not embarrassment anymore. It was a cold, hard rage. "He does that a lot," Natalie said. She was still standing there. She had not moved. "Does what?" I asked, watching my father's retreating back. "Edits the script," she said. If a line does not fit his story, he just cuts it. I looked at her with new interest. You are very observant for a future daughter-in-law. I have to be, she said. I am marrying into a merger, not a family. She took a sip of her drink, and as she lowered the glass, her eyes dropped to my chest. She froze. I looked down. The small enamel pin, the scales of justice, caught the light from the chandelier. Natalie stared at it. Her pupils dilated. The polite social mask she had been wearing slipped, revealing a sudden, naked vulnerability. She looked from the pin to my face, searching my features with a desperate intensity. That pin, she whispered. Work, I said simply. I forgot to take it off. Meriton unit, she said. It was not a question. Financial crimes. Yes, I said. Surprised she knew the specific unit name. Most people just called us the auditors or the feds. You work for the financial crimes unit, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. I am the lead investigator, I said. Why? She looked around the room, her eyes darting to Ethan, who was laughing loudly near the buffet, and then back to me. She looked like someone who had just realized the floor she was standing on was made of paper. Oh my God, she breathed. The color drained from her face, leaving her stark white against her dark dress. Harper Hudson, H. Hudson, it was not a man. What? The signature, she murmured, more to herself than me. On the discovery files, the agent who flagged the accounts, it was H. Hudson. I thought I assumed it was a man. It is usually a safe assumption in my field, I said. But no, it was me. She looked at me as if I were a lifeboat that had suddenly appeared in the middle of the ocean. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. You are the one, she whispered. You are the one who found the second set of books. You are the one who proved I was just the assistant, that I did not know about the transfers. I stiffened. The Phoenix Trust case. 2 years ago, we had indicted the partners, but the administrative assistants had been cleared because we found evidence they were being manipulated. You were the assistant at Phoenix Trust, I asked, keeping my voice low. I was Natalie Miller then, she said. I changed my name after the trial. I wanted to start over. I wanted to forget. She looked at Ethan, who was now raising a glass to toast a group of admirers. Her expression shifted from shock to horror. He knows, she said. Ethan knows about the trial. He told me his family was different. He told me they were clean. Natalie, I said, stepping closer. What is going on? Before she could answer, the room went dark. A spotlight cut through the gloom, hitting the stage. My father tapped the microphone. The sound boomed through the speakers, demanding silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham's voice rolled out, smooth and commanding. If I could have your attention, please. Natalie looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. I need to talk to you, she hissed. Now. Shh, a woman next to us scolded. Welcome to a night of celebration, Graham continued. Tonight, we are not just celebrating a marriage, we are celebrating the future of the Hudson legacy. I looked at my father on stage. He looked magnificent. He looked trustworthy. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was about to tell a story that erased me completely. But as I stood there, with Natalie Breyer trembling beside me and the weight of my own history pressing down on my shoulders, I realized something. He could erase me from the guest list. He could erase me from the speech, but he could not erase me from the public record. And thanks to the notification that was about to hit my phone, he had just invited the one person who knew exactly how to read it. Watch this, I whispered to Natalie. He is about to sell you a lemon. Graham smiled, opening his arms to the room. I want to talk to you about investment, he began, and the show began. The spotlight cut through the dimness of the ballroom, turning the dust motes into floating specks of gold before landing squarely on my father. Graham Hudson stood at the podium, gripping the sides with the confidence of a man who believed gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. He adjusted the microphone, a smile stretching across his face that I knew cost $6,000 in dental work. Legacy, Graham said, letting the word hang in the air like cigar smoke. It is a heavy word. It implies a burden, but I see it differently. I see legacy as an investment strategy. The room rippled with polite, knowing laughter. These were people who understood the language of equity and dividends better than they understood the language of love. When I started the Ridgeway Group 40 years ago, I had a vision, he continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical hush. I wanted to build something that would outlast me, something that would stand tall long after I was gone. But a company is just paperwork without blood to run it. He swept his hand toward the side of the stage. Where Ethan stood, looking appropriately humble and dashing in his tuxedo, "We make choices as parents," Graham said. "We choose where to allocate our resources. We choose who to bet on. And tonight, I can stand here, look you all in the eye, and say that my bet paid off." I stood by the velvet curtains near the kitchen entrance, holding a glass of lukewarm water. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest, a numbness that started in my fingertips and worked its way in. I knew what was coming. I had heard variations of this speech at dinner tables for 20 years, but never with an audience of 300 people. "Ethan," Graham boomed, his voice swelling with pride, "you are not just my son. You are the realization of the Hudson name. You are the one who stepped up. You are the one who carried the torch." He paused for effect, looking out over the crowd. "In a world where so many young people are lost, where they lack direction or drive, I am blessed," he said. "I am blessed to have one child, my only successful child who understands the value of hard work and ambition. My only successful child." The phrase hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. It was not implied anymore. It was not a subtext. It was a declaration. In the court of public opinion, Graham Hudson had just testified that he had one son and 0 daughters. I was not just a disappointment. I was a non-entity. I was a failed venture that had been written off the books so long ago that I was no longer even worth a footnote in the annual report. The applause that followed was thunderous. Ethan stepped forward, shaking my father's hand, playing the role of the dutiful heir to perfection. They looked like a matched set, 2 golden statues gleaming under the artificial light. I stood frozen. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to storm the stage and shout my resume into the microphone. I wanted to list every conviction I had secured, every dollar I had recovered, every victim I had helped, but I knew it would not matter. To these people, success was not about justice, it was about net worth, and in their eyes, I was bankrupt. As the applause died down and the jazz band struck up a celebratory tune, the crowd began to mingle again. I turned to retreat further into the shadows. Intending to slip out the side door, I had seen enough. The experiment was over, the wire was still there, and it was razor sharp. "Excuse me," a voice said near my elbow. I turned. A man with silver hair and a monocle, an actual monocle, was looking at me with mild curiosity. He held a scotch in one hand. "I could not help but notice you standing here," he said. "I am Arthur Sterling. I have been on the board with Graham for 10 years. I do not believe we have met." "I am Harper," I said, keeping it brief. "Harper," he repeated, tilting his head. "Are you a cousin? A niece, I must say. Graham never mentioned a daughter." I opened my mouth to speak, but my father materialized out of the crowd like a shark sensing blood in the water. He placed a heavy hand on Mr. Sterling's shoulder, steering him slightly away from me. "Arthur," Graham exclaimed, his voice hearty and fake. "I see you found Harper. Yes, she is part of the clan." "She was just telling me she is your daughter," Arthur said. I was surprised. "You always speak of Ethan." Graham laughed, a dismissive, airy sound. "Well, you know how it is. Arthur, Harper is very private. She leads a quiet life, very simple. She is not really cut out for this high-octane world of ours." "Are you, sweetheart?" He did not look at me when he asked the question. He looked at Arthur, his eyes signaling a shared understanding between powerful men about the frailty of women. "I prefer to let my work speak for itself," I said, my voice cool. "Exactly," Graham said, clapping Arthur on the back. "She works for the state, filing, data entry, that sort of thing. Keeps her busy, keeps her out of trouble. Now, Arthur, I need to introduce you to the delegation from Singapore." He swept Arthur away before the man could ask another question. I was left standing alone, dismissed as a simpleton with a filing job, a quiet life that needed to be protected from the rigors of success. I set my glass down on a passing tray. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from the effort it took not to scream. "He is good at that," a voice said. I turned. Natalie Breyer was standing there. She had separated herself from the crowd of admirers surrounding Ethan. She looked pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was not looking at the party. She was looking at me. "Good at what?" I asked. "Spin," she said. "He takes a fact and twists it until it fits the shape of the hole in his ego." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume jasmine and sandalwood was overpowering. Her eyes were laser-focused on my face. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice low and urgent. "And I need you to tell me the truth. No spin." "I do not spin," I said. "That pin on your jacket," she said, glancing down at the scales of justice before locking eyes with me again. "And what you said earlier, about being a lead investigator." "Yes." "Were you at the closed-door hearing on November 12th, she asked. 2 years ago, the one where they presented the evidence against the Phoenix Trust partners, the one where the judge cleared the courtroom." My stomach tightened. That hearing was sealed. The transcripts were classified. Only the legal teams, the judge, and the investigating officers were there. "That is a specific date," I said, my guard going up. "Why do you ask?" "Because I was in the holding room next door," Natalie whispered. "I was waiting to see if I was going to be arrested. My lawyer came out after 3 hours. He was shaking. He told me that the lead investigator had just systematically dismantled the defense's argument that the assistants were complicit. He said the investigator walked the judge through the timestamps on the emails and proved we were being BCC'd on instructions we never saw." She took a breath, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "He said the investigator's name was Hudson," she said. "He said, 'Thank God for Agent Hudson, because he just saved your life. We all thought you were a man. We all thought you were some 50-year-old veteran.'" I looked at her. I saw the fear she must have felt that day. The terror of a young woman being framed by powerful men. I remembered that hearing. I remembered standing before Judge Reynolds, pointing at the projection screen, feeling the cold anger of seeing wealthy men use their staff as human shields. "It was not a he," I said quietly. "It was me." Natalie let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and horror. "You saved me," she said. "You are the reason I am not in prison. And your father just told 300 people you do data entry." "My father sees what he wants to see," I said. "He does not know," she said, shaking her head. "He has no idea who you are. If he knew you were the one who took down Phoenix Trust." "He would not care," I said, "because I did not make $1 million doing it." "Hey!" The shout broke the moment. Ethan came striding toward us, a glass of champagne in one hand. His face flushed with the intoxication of being the center of attention. He looked from Natalie to me, his expression souring. "What is going on over here?" Ethan asked, slinging an arm around Natalie's shoulders. She stiffened, her body pulling away from him instinctively. "Natalie, babe, you are missing the rounds. The senator wants to meet you." He glanced at me with a sneer. "Harper, stop boring her. I told you, nobody wants to hear about your government benefits package or whatever it is you do." He laughed at his own joke. It was a cruel, wet sound. Natalie did not laugh. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the hand resting on her shoulder, the hand of a man who had never worked for anything, who accepted credit for things he did not build. And then she looked at me, the woman who had quietly, anonymously saved her life while her own family called her a failure. "She is not boring me," Natalie said. Her voice was ice cold. "We were just talking about competence." Ethan blinked, missing the subtext entirely. "Right. Well, come on. Dad is waving us over." He pulled her away. Natalie resisted for a second, her eyes locking with mine one last time. There was a question in them, a plea. What else are they lying about? My mother appeared out of nowhere, flanking Natalie on the other side. "Come along, dear," Marion chirped, her voice tight with stress. "The ladies in the garden room are dying to see your ring." They dragged her away. A prisoner of their expectations, I stood alone again. Across the room, my father was watching me. He was not smiling. His eyes were hard, flat stones. He gave a microscopic shake of his head. "Do not ruin this." I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. I was done. I had seen the play. I knew the ending. I was the villain who was supposed to fade into the background so the hero could shine. I turned toward the exit. I was going to leave. I was going to go home to Stuart, order a pizza, and forget that the name Hudson ever belonged to me. But the universe, it seemed, had a different ending in mind. My phone buzzed against my hip. It was not a text. It was a rapid-fire series of vibrations that I associated with a crisis. I pulled the phone out of my clutch. The screen was glowing with a high-priority alert from the Meriton Unit's internal messaging system. Sender Agent Varez, Unit Chief timestamp 8:42 p.m. message. "Harper, are you near a secure line? We just got a hit on the cross-reference algorithm for the Shell Company investigation." I frowned. The Shell Company investigation was the active case I was working on, a network of fake businesses used to launder money for an unknown beneficiary. A second message popped up immediately. Message. One of the primary signatories just pinged a credit inquiry. It matches a name in your personal file. My heart stopped. I looked at the third message. Message. Name Ethan Hudson. Entity Hudson Ventures. Status flagged for immediate review. Harper. Is this your brother? I stared at the screen. The noise of the party faded into a distant hum, the clinking glasses, the jazz music. The laughter had all disappeared. Ethan, my successful brother, the one my father had just called his only achievement. His name was not just on a marriage license, it was on a federal watch list. And then, a fourth notification slid onto the screen. This one was from my personal bank monitoring app. New credit alert. Second inquiry detected. Creditor Ridgeway Meridian Group. Amount $75,000. Applicant Harper Hudson. Cosigner Ethan Hudson. I looked up, across the room. Graham was raising a glass to toast his son. Ethan was smiling, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. They were not just erasing me, they were liquidating me. I put the phone back in my bag. I did not turn toward the exit. I turned back toward the room. I was not leaving, not yet. The phone in my hand felt radioactive. I did not scream. I did not throw the device across the room. I did what 10 years of law enforcement had trained me to do. I secured the perimeter. I turned my back on the ballroom, on the applause that was still rippling for my brother, and walked swiftly toward the heavy velvet curtains that masked the entrance to the service corridor. I needed silence. I needed a signal. And most of all, I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went before I started cutting it out. The corridor was cool and smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. A waiter was stacking trays near a side door. But he ignored me. I found a recessed alcove near the emergency exit, leaned against the wall, and unlocked my phone. My hands were steady. My heart was beating at a slow, thundering rhythm, a war drum in my chest. I opened the credit monitoring app. The red banner was still there, pulsing like a fresh wound. Inquiry blocked, pending verification. That was the new one, the $75,000 my father had tried to borrow in my name tonight, presumably to pay for this very party, or to plug a hole in Ethan's sinking ship. But now that I was looking at the dashboard, I saw something else. I tapped on the tab labeled History. Usually, I checked my credit score once a month. It was always excellent, 820. I paid my bills. I had a mortgage I shared with Stuart. I had modest student loans that I was aggressively paying down. I was boring. But I had never clicked on the tab labeled Closed Accounts. Why would I? I knew what I had paid off. I clicked it now. The list populated. Student loan servicing. Paid in full. Mine. Auto finance. Paid in full. Stuart's truck. Hudson Education Trust / private lender. Revolving. I froze. Hudson Education Trust. I tapped the entry. The details expanded. Origination date. August 15th, 2010. Original principal, $45,000. Status, transferred / consolidated. August 2010. I closed my eyes, doing the mental math. I was 19 years old in 2010. I was working the graveyard shift at the call center and sleeping in my car between classes. I was eating ramen noodles and stealing napkins from the cafeteria. August 2010 was also the month Ethan started his freshman year at the private university my father had bragged about, the $45,000 tuition. The one Graham said he was handling, he had handled it. All right, he had handled it by opening a credit line in the name of his teenage daughter, who he knew was too estranged and too poor to notice. I opened the attached PDF of the promissory note. It took a moment to load on the hotel Wi-Fi. When it finally popped up, I zoomed in on the signature line. There, in black ink, was a signature. Harper Hudson. I stared at it. It was a good forgery. The loop on the H was sweeping, just like mine. The slant was right, but the N at the end was too sharp. I ended my signature with a flat line, a habit from signing hundreds of evidence logs. This signature ended with a flourish. It was a signature written by someone who thought they were signing an autograph, not a legal document. My stomach turned over. It was not just theft. It was identity fraud. It was a felony. My phone vibrated again. A secure message from Varez. Harper, I am looking at the corporate structure of Hudson Ventures. It is a mess. It is layered like an onion. But we found a link to the shell company under surveillance. Me. Which one, Varez? Remember the Clearwater Holdings case? The one laundering money for the offshore gambling ring? Me, yes. Varez. Ethan Hudson is listed as a silent partner in a subsidiary called Clearwater Logistics. And get this, the initial buy-in for his partnership was made 2 days ago. Amount $50,000. I leaned my head back against the wall. The pieces were slamming together with the force of a train wreck. My father had taken out a $50,000 loan in my name earlier tonight, and 2 days ago, Ethan had bought in to a money laundering operation with exactly that amount. They were not just using my credit to pay bills. They were using my clean financial history to wash dirty money. They were using me as a mule. If the feds raided Clearwater tomorrow, they would trace the funds back, and they would not find Graham Hudson's accounts. They would not find Ethan's accounts, which were likely overdrawn or protected by trust statutes. They would find a loan origination signed by Harper Hudson. I would be the one in handcuffs. I would be the one losing my badge, my pension, and my freedom. Son of a bitch, I whispered. I switched apps. Opening the state business registry, I needed to see the structure of Ethan's company, the one they were celebrating tonight. I typed in Hudson Ventures. The profile loaded. It was a private equity firm. I scrolled down to the board of directors. CEO Ethan Hudson, CFO interim, Secretary Anita Smith. I ran a quick cross-reference on Anita Smith using a public data aggregator tool I had on my phone. No results found for Anita Smith at the registered address. It was a ghost employee. A placeholder name used to fill a legal requirement for incorporation. I looked at the funding sources. Primary investor, Anonymous Trust. Secondary investor, Ridgeway Meridian Group, Graham Hudson. I tapped on Anonymous Trust A. It was a dead end in the public registry. But I knew how my father operated. He was arrogant. He liked to keep his secrets close. I checked the registered agent for the trust. The address was a P.O. box in Cedar Vale, the same P.O. box my mother used for her gardening club newsletters. I let out a short, incredulous breath. It was a closed loop. My father was taking money from his company, Ridgeway Meridian, funneling it into this trust, and then using the trust to prop up Ethan's fake business. But to make the trust look legitimate, to give it credit-worthiness, they needed a guarantor with a clean record and no connections to the existing debt. Me, I was the collateral. I was the insurance policy. I put the phone in my pocket. My hands were no longer shaking. A cold, clinical clarity had settled over me. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a case file. I was standing in the middle of a crime scene, and the perpetrators were eating cake in the next room. I pushed off the wall. I did not go back to the ballroom immediately. I needed one more confirmation. I had the digital trail. I had the motive. Now I needed the witness. I walked down the corridor, past the kitchen where waiters were plating slices of white cake with raspberry coulis. I turned the corner toward the ladies' lounge. I knew my mother would be there. She always retreated to the bathroom when the stress became too much. It was her sanctuary, the only place where she could drop the mask for 3 minutes without Graham correcting her posture. I pushed the door open. The lounge was empty, save for one woman standing at the vanity, reapplying lipstick with a trembling hand. Marion Hudson saw me in the mirror. She froze, the tube of lipstick hovering halfway to her mouth. "Harper," she said, her voice tight. "You have been gone a long time. Your father noticed. He was asking where you were." "Was he?" I asked, stepping inside and letting the door click shut behind me. The sound was final, like a cell door closing. "Yes," she said, capping the lipstick and turning to face me. She looked tired, under the harsh lights of the vanity. The layers of foundation could not hide the lines of anxiety etched around her mouth. "He wants everyone on stage for the toast in 10 minutes. You need to come out. Fix your hair. You look intense." I looked up my credit report. "Mom," I said. Marion blinked. It was a small, fluttering movement, like a bird hitting a window. "What?" "My credit report," I repeated, walking closer until I was standing 2 feet away from her. "I got an alert. Someone tried to take out $75,000 in my name tonight, and $50,000 2 days ago." "That must be a mistake," she said quickly, too quickly. She turned back to the mirror, pretending to adjust her earring. "Computers make mistakes all the time. You should call the bank in the morning." I dug deeper, I said to her reflection. "I found a student loan from 16 years ago, $45,000, the exact cost of Ethan's freshman tuition." Marion's hands went still on her earlobe. She did not speak. "The loan is in my name," I said, "but I never signed it. I was working at the diner. I was paying for community college with cash. I never took a loan." I pulled my phone out and brought up the PDF of the promissory note. I held it up next to her face in the mirror. "Look at the signature. Mom." She refused to look. She squeezed her eyes shut. "It looks like mine," I said. "But the N is wrong. It is the way someone would write it if they had practiced it, if they had access to my old homework papers, if they had a sample." "Harper, stop," she whispered. "Who signed it?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it stripped the oxygen from the room. "Did Dad sign it?" She shook her head frantically. No. He would never. He does not do the paperwork. You know that." "Then who?" I pressed. "Ethan. He was 18. He was too busy partying to fill out FAFSA forms." Marion opened her eyes. They were wet, brimming with a panic that had been fermented for decades. She turned to me, her hands gripping the edge of the marble counter as if the floor were tilting. "We had to," she sobbed. The confession burst out of her before she could stop it. "We had to. Harper, his credit was overextended. The business was in a tight spot that year. The banks would not lend to him personally, and Ethan needed to go to that school. It was his only chance." "So you used me?" I asked. "You used the daughter you kicked out." "We did not kick you out," she pleaded. You left, and you were doing so well. You were always so responsible. We knew you would have good credit. We borrowed it, just for a little while. Graham said he would pay it back before you ever noticed." "He never paid it back," I said. "It is still there. It has been accruing interest for 16 years, and now he is doing it again. He is doing it tonight." "He is in a jam," Marion cried. "The merger, it is complicated. He just needs a bridge loan. Once the deal closes, he will fix everything. He promised." I looked at her. I looked at this woman who had birthed me, who had bandaged my scraped knees, and I realized she was not a victim. She was an accomplice. "You signed it," I said. It was not a question anymore. She crumpled. Her shoulders slumped, and she covered her face with her hands. "He told me to." She wept. "He brought me the papers. He said, 'Marion, make it look like Harper's. You know her hand.' He said it was for the family. He said if I did not do it, Ethan would lose his spot. I could not let Ethan fail. Harper, you know how he is. He is not strong like you." "Not strong like me," I repeated, the bitterness coating my tongue. "So because I am strong, I get to be the victim. Because I am strong, I get to be the sacrifice." "You were not using the credit," she argued, dropping her hands and looking at me with a desperate, twisted logic. "You were living in that apartment. You had no debt. It was just sitting there. It was a resource." "It was my name," I said. "It is my life. Please." She grabbed my arm. Her grip was weak, trembling. "Do not make a scene out there. Not tonight. He will destroy you. Harper, if you embarrass him in front of the board, he will cut you off. He will ruin you." I looked down at her hand on my black sleeve. I thought about the files on my desk at the unit. I thought about Natalie Breyer, terrified and trapped. I thought about Stuart, working a 24-hour shift to pay our honest bills. And I thought about the $50,000 that was currently moving through a shell company, tying me to a federal crime. "He cannot ruin me." "Mom," I said, pulling my arm away. "Because I am the one holding the evidence." "What are you going to do?" she whispered, terrified. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. Credit inquiry approved. They had pushed it through. They had overridden the fraud alert. Graham must have called his banker. I put the phone away. I smoothed my dress. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm. I looked like a woman who was about to give a toast. "I am going to go finish the party," I said. "Harper, no," Marion begged. Reaching for me again, I sidestepped her. I opened the door. The sound of the jazz band drifted in a cheerful, upbeat tune that sounded like a funeral march for the Hudson legacy. "You should fix your lipstick." "Mom," I said, looking back at her one last time. "You are going to want to look your best when the police arrive." I walked out of the bathroom and headed back toward the ballroom. I was done investigating. It was time to start prosecuting. My hand was on the brass handle of the lounge door, ready to push out into the corridor, when my mother's grip tightened on my wrist. It was not the weak, fluttering touch of the woman I had known for 30 years. It was the desperate, clawing grip of a drowning swimmer pulling someone down with them. "You cannot go out there," Marion hissed. "Not like this. Not until you hear the rest." She did not wait for my permission. She yanked me sideways, not back toward the vanity mirrors, but toward a discreet door paneled in the same silk wallpaper as the rest of the room. It was the private changing suite, reserved for brides and VIPs who needed to recover from the exhaustion of being looked at. She shoved the door open and pulled me inside. The room was small, smelling of lavender sachets and panic. A velvet chaise lounge sat in the center, looking ridiculous and soft. "I am done listening." "Mom," I said, trying to wrench my arm free. "I have heard enough. You forged my signature. You stole my credit. There is nothing else to say." "There is," she gasped, putting her back against the door to block my exit. Her chest was heaving under the silk of her gown. "You think it is just money. You think it is just greedy. It is not. It is survival." "Survival." I laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. You live in a $2 million house. Mom, you drive a car that costs more than my education. Do not talk to me about survival. You do not know what it is like living with him, she whispered. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a terrifying fragility. Graham, he is leveraged. Everything you see out there, the house, the cars, the club membership, it is all leveraged. If he takes out one more loan in his own name, the banks will trigger a review. They will call in the notes. The whole house of cards falls down. I stared at her. The great Graham Hudson, the titan of industry, was drowning in debt. It made sense. Narcissists always spend tomorrow's money to buy today's applause. So he used me, I said, my voice cold. Because I am the only one with a clean record. He said you were the safe option, Marion said, looking at the floor. He said, Harper is invisible. She stays in her lane. She does not apply for big loans. She will never notice. Harper is invisible. The words cut deeper than the theft itself. It was one thing to be unloved. It was another to be calculated. To my father, I was not a person. I was an unused asset. I was a spare room in a house he owned, a place to store his junk where the guests would not see it. He did not just use me because I was safe, I said, stepping closer to her. He used me because he knew you would let him. He knew you would sign the papers. I had to keep the peace, Marion cried, tears finally spilling over her mascara. You do not understand. When he gets angry, when he feels cornered, he destroys things. I did it to keep the family together. I did it to protect you from his temper. No, I said. Do not say you did this to protect me. You sacrificed me. You threw me into the fire to keep him warm. I had no choice. You always have a choice, I snapped. You chose your husband's comfort over your daughter's safety. You chose to be a wife instead of a mother. That was your choice. Own it. Marion flinched as if I had slapped her. She sank onto the velvet chaise, burying her face in her hands. The image was pathetic, a woman in a $5,000 dress, weeping in a closet because she had sold her soul to a man who did not even know the price. I watched her, feeling a strange detachment. The anger was still there, but it was cooling into something hard and useful. The money, I said, bringing the conversation back to the evidence. The $75,000 tonight, the $50,000 2 days ago, where is it going? You said Ethan needed a bridge loan, but I know where the money went. It went to a shell company. Marion looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. It is for the project, for Hudson Ventures. Bullshit, I said. Legitimate projects have bank financing. They do not use identity theft and shell companies. What is the money for? Mom. She hesitated. She picked at a loose thread on the chaise. Tell me, I commanded, or I walk out there and ask Graham through the microphone. It is operational costs, she whispered. Downtime costs. Speak English. Permits, she blurted out. Approvals. There are people, local officials, inspectors. They need to be encouraged to fast-track the zoning, to overlook the environmental reports. My blood ran cold. Bribes, I said. You are talking about bribes. Graham calls it clearing the path, she said weakly. It is a felony, I said. It is racketeering, and he is using my name to fund it. If that project goes down, if the feds trace those payments, they will not see Graham Hudson bribing a zoning official. They will see a check from Harper Hudson. I paced the small room. It was worse than I thought. It was not just financial abuse. It was a setup. My father was building a criminal enterprise and using my identity as the foundation. Does Ethan know? I asked. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. Mom, I said, turning to face her. Does Ethan know that the money clearing the path is coming from a credit line in my name? Marion did not answer. She bit her lip. She looked at the wall, at her hands, at the door, anywhere but me. He knows, I said. The realization hit me with the weight of a stone. Of course he knows. He is the CEO. He sees the accounts. He feels bad about it, Marion whispered. He told me last week. He said, "Mom, when this deal closes, the first thing I'm going to do is pay Harper back, with interest. He loves you, Harper. He really does." "He does not love me," I said. "He is stealing from me. There is a difference." My brother, the golden boy, the one who smiled at me in the hallway and made jokes about my government job. He had been shaking my hand with one hand and picking my pocket with the other. He was not just a spoiled brat, he was a co-conspirator. I felt a vibration in my clutch. I pulled out my phone. It was a text message. Sender Natalie Breyer message. "Meet me on the terrace, right now." I found the ledger. I stared at the screen. Natalie, the woman who had been saved by my work once before. She was not just a passive observer in this. She was digging. I looked at my mother. She was still sitting on the chaise, a crumbling monument to denial. "You need to stay here," I said. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic rising in her voice again. "I am going to finish this," I said. "I am going to give Graham exactly what he paid for. Harper, please," she begged, standing up. "Do not ruin his night. He has worked so hard for this image." "His image is a lie," I said. "And the thing about lies, Mom, is that they are expensive. Eventually, the bill comes due." I opened the door. "Harper," she called after me. "If you do this, if you humiliate him, he will never forgive you. You will lose this family." I stopped in the doorway. I looked back at her. "I lost this family 16 years ago," I said. "I am just now getting the receipt." I stepped out of the dressing room and into the corridor. The music from the ballroom was louder now. A crescendo of brass and drums. It sounded like a climax. I walked toward the terrace doors. I did not run. I did not hide. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a woman who was no longer afraid of the dark, because she had just realized she was the one holding the torch. I was done being the ghost. It was time to be the haunting. I walked back into the ballroom just as the master of ceremonies, a man with teeth so white they looked radioactive, tapped the microphone to signal the next act in the Hudson family pageant. "And now," the MC announced, his voice dripping with synthetic warmth, "we would like to invite the woman who has captured the heart of our golden boy. Please welcome the future Mrs. Ethan Hudson, Natalie Breyer." The applause was polite, rhythmic, and expensive. Ethan beamed, clapping louder than anyone else, looking for all the world like a man who had successfully acquired a trophy asset. Graham stood at the foot of the stage, his hands clasped behind his back, rocking on his heels with the satisfied smirk of a director watching his script play out perfectly. I stood in the shadows near the dessert station, my back against a marble pillar. I had not fled. I had not made a scene. I was simply waiting. Natalie ascended the stairs to the stage. She moved with a strange, stiff grace, like a marionette whose strings were pulled too tight. She took the microphone from the MC. She did not smile. She did not wave. She stood there, letting the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. The room quieted down, the clinking of silverware fading away. "Thank you," Natalie said. Her voice was clear, but it lacked the breathy excitement of a blushing bride. It had the timbre of a witness taking the stand. "The Hudson family has welcomed me with open arms. They have talked a lot tonight about legacy, about investment, about the importance of names." Graham nodded encouragingly from the floor, raising his champagne glass. "That is it. Girl, stick to the script." "But names are tricky things," Natalie continued, her eyes scanning the room before locking onto Ethan. 3 years ago, my name was on a list. It was a list of people who were going to be indicted for a $40 million securities fraud at Phoenix Trust. The air in the room shifted instantly. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the anecdote about how they met at a ski resort. This was something sharp and ugly. Graham's smile faltered. He took half a step toward the stage. his eyebrows knitting together. "I was an executive assistant," Natalie said, her voice rising slightly. "I signed papers I was told were routine. I sent emails I was told were standard. I did not know I was being used as a human shield for a group of partners who were stealing pension funds. I was 26. I was looking at 15 years in federal prison." She paused. The room was dead silent now. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "I would be in prison right now," Natalie said, "if it were not for the lead investigator on the case, an investigator who refused to accept the easy narrative, an investigator who dug through thousands of pages of deleted files to prove that the assistants were innocent victims of a top-down conspiracy." She took a breath, and her eyes found me in the shadows. "For 3 years, I only knew that investigator as Agent H. Hudson. I assumed he was a man. I assumed he was just doing a job." Natalie pointed a shaking finger at me. "But she is standing right there. Harper Hudson, the sister my fiancé told me was a secretary. The daughter this family told me was insignificant." Every head in the room turned. 300 people looked at me. I did not shrink. I did not look down. I held my chin high, my face impassive. I was Agent Hudson now. Ethan's face went slack. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like he had been embalmed. Graham recovered first. He laughed, a loud, booming sound that sounded like a gunshot in a library. He practically leaped onto the stage, reaching for the microphone. "Natalie, darling," he shouted, trying to wrestle the mic from her hand. "You are emotional. The wedding stress, the champagne, she is a little overwhelmed. Folks, let's give her a hand." "I am not overwhelmed, Graham," Natalie said, pulling the microphone back with a strength that surprised him. Her voice boomed through the speakers, distorted but powerful. "And I am not drunk. I am waking up." She turned to Ethan, who was standing frozen at the edge of the stage. "You knew," she said to him. "You knew your sister was the one who saved me. You saw the case files. You knew H. Hudson was Harper." "I did not," Ethan stammered, his hands coming up in a defensive posture. "Don't lie," Natalie snapped. "But that is not the worst part, is it? The worst part is what you did not tell me about yourself. Natalie, stop this." Graham roared, abandoning the charm. "Get off the stage." "You did not tell me," Natalie said, speaking over him, her eyes locked on Ethan, "that the primary investor in Phoenix Trust, the money behind the men who tried to frame me, was a shell company called Cobalt Ventures, a company you sat on the board of." The gasp that went through the room was genuine this time. It was the sound of air being sucked out of a vacuum. "You were on the other side," Natalie accused, her voice breaking. "You were sitting in boardrooms with the men who were planning to let me rot in a cell to protect their dividends. And you are marrying me. You are marrying the witness." Ethan's face twisted. The mask of the golden boy fell away, revealing the petulant, frightened child underneath. He lunged forward, not to comfort her, but to silence her. "It was business," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking without the microphone, but loud enough to be heard in the stunned silence. "I was a silent partner. I did not know they were going to pin it on the staff I just provided the liquidity." He stopped, realizing too late what he had said. He had just admitted to providing liquidity to a fraudulent enterprise. He had just admitted to being involved. "Liquidity," I said. I spoke from the floor, but my voice carried. I walked out of the shadows, moving toward the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, terrified of whatever contagion was destroying the Hudson family. "That is the word of the night, isn't it?" I asked, looking at my father. Liquidity, the ability to move money fast, to make it disappear, to make it appear where it does not belong. Graham stood on the stage, his chest heaving. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The mask was gone. There was no more benevolent patriarch. There was only a man who realized his investment was rebelling. "Security," Graham barked, pointing at me. "Get her out of here. She is trespassing." The 2 guards by the door hesitated. They looked at me, the woman in the simple black dress who walked like a cop, and they looked at Graham, the sweating, shouting man on the stage. Before they could move, the double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. It was not a polite opening, it was a breach. A figure stood in the doorway. He was wearing a heavy canvas turnout coat that was stained with soot. He was wearing boots that left mud on the pristine carpet. He smelled of wood smoke and exhaust, a sharp, acrid scent that cut through the lilies and the expensive perfume. It was Stuart. He looked exhausted. His face was smudged with ash. He had come straight from a fire, but his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on me. I had texted him one word when I left the bathroom. He did not ask why. He did not ask if I was sure. He just came. Stuart walked across the room. He did not look at the wealthy guests who recoiled from his dirty coat. He did not look at the crystal chandeliers. He walked straight to me, carrying a thick manila envelope in his hand. "I got it," Stuart said, his voice raspy from the smoke. He handed me the envelope. "It was exactly where you said it would be, in the community outreach filing cabinet at the station." Graham froze on stage. "Who is this? What is that?" "This," I said, holding up the envelope, "is the missing piece of your liquidity puzzle. Dad?" I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. "You see," I said, turning to address the room, "my husband is a firefighter, and every year, the Ridgeway Meridian Group makes a generous donation to the Firemen's Benevolent Fund. It is a great tax write-off. It looks great in the papers." I held up a document. But this year, the donation came with a rider, a stipulation that the funds be directed to a specific contractor for station renovations, a contractor named Clearwater Logistics. I looked at Ethan. He flinched. "Clearwater Logistics," I said, "is the same shell company Ethan just bought into 2 days ago, using $50,000. "So what?" Graham snarled, though his voice was shaking. "We support local businesses. That is not a crime. It is when the money comes from a fraudulent credit line opened in the name of an unknowing third party," I said. "And it is definitely a crime when that local business does not exist. There is no renovation happening at the station. Dad?" Stuart checked. "The address for Clearwater Logistics is a mailbox in a strip mall." The crowd began to whisper. Phones were coming out. People were recording. "It is a kickback loop," I said, laying it out for the room. "You donate to the charity to get the tax break. You force the charity to hire your son's fake company. The money flows back to Ethan, clean and laundered, and you funded the initial buy-in by stealing my identity." "That is a lie," Graham screamed. He looked frantic now. He grabbed the microphone again. "This is a misunderstanding. My daughter she is confused. She has always been jealous of Ethan. She is trying to sabotage his big night." He pointed at me, his finger trembling. "You are unstable. Harper, you are making this up because you cannot stand to see your brother succeed." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me I did not need degrees. I looked at the man who had told me I just needed a husband. And then I looked at the document in my hand. There was one more page. "Am I asked softly. I pulled out the last sheet. It was the authorization form for the charity transfer. "Stuart," I asked, "who signed the release for the funds to go to Clearwater?" Stuart looked at Graham, his eyes hard. "The chairman of the Benevolent Fund usually signs it, but he was out of town last week." "So who signed it?" I asked. "The honorary treasurer," Stuart said. "Graham Hudson." I held up the paper. There was Graham's signature. Big, bold, and undeniable. "You signed the check that sent the money to the company your son owns," I said, "and you used the credit you stole from me to seed the account that received it." Graham stood there, the microphone dangling from his hand. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the investors in the front row. He looked at the chairman of the board, Arthur Sterling, who was slowly putting down his glass and standing up with a look of thunderous disapproval. "Arthur," Graham gasped. "Wait, let me explain. It is just an administrative error." Arthur Sterling adjusted his monocle. He did not look at Graham. He looked at me. "Agent Hudson," Arthur said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "Is this documentation verified?" "Yes, sir," I said. "And I have already sent digital copies to the state attorney's office." Graham dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a deafening screech of feedback that made everyone cover their ears. But I did not cover mine. I wanted to hear it. It was the sound of the glass ceiling crashing down. Not on me, but on them. Natalie stepped away from Ethan. Taking off her engagement ring, she placed it on the podium. It made a small, sharp click. "I think," Natalie said into the silence. "That concludes the speeches." She walked down the stairs, past a paralyzed Ethan, and came to stand next to me. I looked at my father one last time. He was small. He looked incredibly small on that big stage, under the bright lights, with nowhere left to hide. "You were right, Dad," I said, my voice steady and quiet in the hush of the room. "You told me I didn't need degrees. You were right. All I needed was the truth." I turned to Stuart. He put his arm around me. The soot on his jacket rubbed off on my black dress, but I didn't care. It was the only clean thing in the room. "Let's go," I said. But before we could move, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder, coming closer, piercing the bubble of Hawthorne Crest. I checked my watch. "Right on time," I whispered. The sirens were a backdrop now, a rhythmic, screaming reminder that the real world was coming to dismantle the fantasy inside Hawthorne Crest. But I did not wait for the police to burst through the doors. The court of law would deal with the felonies later. Right now, I was standing in the court of public opinion, and I intended to deliver the closing argument. I stepped up onto the stage. I did not run. I did not rush. I took the stairs one by one, the heels of my shoes clicking against the wood with a sound that echoed like a gavel. Graham shrank back as I approached, his eyes darting to the security guards who were currently too confused by the sudden appearance of a firefighter and the impending arrival of the police to intervene. I reached out and took the microphone from the floor where Graham had dropped it. It was heavy in my hand. Cold. I turned to face the room. 300 faces stared back at me. The investors, the board members, the socialites, the people who had spent the last hour applauding a lie. "My father," I began, my voice steady and amplified, filling every corner of the ballroom, "spent the last hour telling you about legacy. He told you that my brother, Ethan, is his only successful child. He told you that success is measured by the return on investment." I looked at Graham. He was trembling, his face a mask of purple rage and terror. "So, I have a question for the chairman of the board," I said, looking directly at Arthur Sterling in the front row. "If Ethan is such a successful, self-made man, and if I am just a clerical worker with a small life, can someone explain why my name is the guarantor on the credit line that is paying for this party?" A gasp went through the room. It was sharp and collective. "That is a lie," Graham shouted, finding his voice. "She is delusional. She has a history of mental instability." I did not shout back. I did not need to. I simply held up the phone in my hand, displaying the fraud alert I had screenshotted earlier. 16 years ago, I said, keeping my eyes on the audience. When Ethan started his freshman year at his private university, a tuition loan was opened. It was for $45,000. It was opened in the name of Harper Hudson. I was 19. I was working at a diner. I paid for my community college classes with cash and tips. I never signed a loan document in my life. I turned to my father. I took a step closer to him. He looked like a cornered animal. "Here is the problem." "Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous conversational tone that the microphone picked up perfectly. "I have the promissory note. The signature looks like mine. It has my loop. It has my slant." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. "So, here is the question that determines whether you walk out of here or get carried out," I said. "Do you want me to bring in a forensic handwriting analyst to prove that signature is mine? Or do you want to explain to these investors why the signature is perfect, but the person who signed it was 300 miles away working a double shift?" Graham opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew. He knew that I knew. He knew that any answer he gave was a confession. "You are just jealous." The scream came from Ethan. He broke out of his paralysis, stepping forward with his fists clenched. His face was wet with sweat, his hair disheveled. He looked less like a CEO and more like a toddler who had been told playtime was over. "That is what this is," Ethan yelled, pointing at me. "You have always been jealous. You could never hack it in the real world, so you became a cop. You want to tear me down because you cannot stand that I am the one with the vision, I am the one with the future." I looked at my brother. I felt a profound sense of pity. He was 36 years old, and he was still reciting lines my father had written for him. "Ethan," I said calmly, "I do not want your future. Your future is a shell company built on debt you did not earn and crimes you did not have the courage to commit yourself. You are not a businessman. You are a dependent." "I built this," Ethan shrieked, gesturing to the banner of Hudson Ventures behind him. "I made this happen. You bought a seat at the table with money your father stole from my credit rating." I corrected him. "You are not a builder. You are a tenant in a house of cards." I turned to the audience. "My brother calls me jealous," I said. "But the truth is, for 16 years, I have been the silent partner in his life. I have been the collateral. Every time he failed, every time he needed a bailout, my credit score was the cushion that softened the blow. You all think you are investing in Ethan Hudson. You are not. You are investing in a fraud that is wearing my stolen identity like a costume." Ethan lunged for me, a desperate, flailing motion, but he never reached me. Stewart stepped up onto the stage. He did not run. He just moved with the terrifying speed of a man who kicks down doors for a living. He caught Ethan by the lapels of his tuxedo and shoved him back. It was not a violent shove, but it was absolute. Ethan stumbled and fell hard onto the stage floor, his legs tangling in the microphone stand. "Stay down," Stewart said. His voice was not amplified, but everyone heard it. Stewart looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the crowd. "I am a firefighter," Stewart said, his voice raspy. "I do not know much about high finance. I do not know about mergers or acquisitions, but I know about arson. I know that people set fires to hide what they stole." He threw the envelope onto the floor next to Graham. "That envelope contains proof that the charitable donation Graham Hudson made to the Firemen's Benevolent Fund was funneled directly back to a company owned by his son." Stewart said, "I do not know what you call that on Wall Street, but where I come from, we call it stealing from heroes to pay for a lifestyle you cannot afford." The accusation hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. The investors in the front row were standing up now. Phones were raised. The live stream of the Hudson Legacy launch had just become a live broadcast of a criminal exposure. "This is preposterous," Graham sputtered, wiping sweat from his forehead. It is creative accounting. It is standard practice." "It is money laundering," a voice said from the stage stairs. We all turned. Natalie Breyer was standing there. She had walked back up the stairs. She looked at Ethan, who was scrambling to get up from the floor. She looked at Graham, who was disintegrating before our eyes. Then, she looked down at her left hand. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the diamond ring off her finger. It was a massive stone, likely purchased with the same credit line that had just flagged on my phone. "Natalie," Ethan pleaded, reaching out a hand. "Baby, please, don't listen to them. It is complicated." "No, Ethan," Natalie said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. "It is actually very simple." She walked over to the podium and placed the ring on the wood surface. It made a sharp clack that sounded like a lock snapping shut. "I almost went to prison once because I trusted a man in a suit who told me not to worry about the details," Natalie said. "I swore I would never do it again. I am not going to marry a man who builds his future by stealing the name of the person who saved his life." She turned to me. "I am sorry, Harper. I should have seen it sooner." "You see it now," I said. Then, a movement from the side of the stage caught my eye. Marion Hudson was walking toward the center. My mother, the woman who had spent her entire life blending into the wallpaper, who had mastered the art of silence as a survival mechanism. She walked past Graham. She did not look at him. She walked past Ethan. She stopped in front of me. She looked old, under the stage lights, without the mask of her social smile. She looked terrified and exhausted, but she was standing there. "Marion," Graham warned, his voice low and threatening. "Get back in line." Marion ignored him. She looked at me, and tears began to stream down her face, cutting tracks through her perfect makeup. "I signed the first one," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I held the microphone toward her. "I signed the first loan," Marion said, her voice shaking. 16 years ago, your father brought me the papers. He told me to practice your signature. He said we had to do it for the family. He said you would never know." The crowd murmured. It was the final nail. The mother had turned state's witness. "I am so sorry. Harper," Marion sobbed. "I was so afraid of him. I was so afraid of the shouting. I thought if I just kept everything quiet, if I just fixed everything behind the scenes, we could be a family. But we are not a family. We are a business, and it is a corrupt business." "Marion," Graham screamed. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Shut up, you stupid woman. You are ruining everything." The mask was fully off now. The benevolent patriarch was gone. In his place was a bully, a man who saw his wife and children not as people, but as props that were malfunctioning. "Let go of her," I said. Graham spun on me. "You," he spat. "You ungrateful, spiteful little wretch, I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me, by airing our dirty laundry in front of the board." "I am not repaying you, Dad," I said cold and hard. "I am foreclosing on you." "I should have cut you off years ago," Graham yelled, losing all control. "I should have left you to rot in that diner. You were never part of this family. You were just a tool. You were a spare part. We kept in the garage in case the main engine failed. And now look at you. You are worthless to me. Worthless." The silence that followed was absolute. Graham panted, his chest heaving. He looked around the room, expecting to see nodding heads, expecting to see people who agreed that children were property to be used. But he saw only disgust. Arthur Sterling turned his back. He signaled to the other board members. Without a word, they began to walk toward the exit. "Arthur," Graham called out, panic rising in his voice. "Arthur, wait. It is just a family dispute. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix, Graham," Arthur said without turning around. "The police are outside. I suspect they will want to speak to you about the company funds. Consider your position on the board terminated effective immediately." The guests followed. The people Graham had spent a lifetime trying to impress. The people he had stolen from me to entertain, they turned and walked away. They did not look at him. They looked at their phones, checking their own accounts, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Hudson name. Graham stood alone on the stage. Ethan was still on the floor, weeping silently. Marion stood next to me, her head bowed. I lowered the microphone. I did not need it anymore. "It is over, Dad," I said. "You ruined me," Graham whispered, staring at the empty room. "You destroyed my legacy." "No," I said. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who filled the room with trash." The double doors opened again. This time, it was not a firefighter. It was 4 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in suits. I recognized one of them. It was Detective Miller from the Fraud Division. "Graham Hudson," Miller called out. "Ethan Hudson, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering." Graham looked at the officers. He looked at the empty ballroom. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might finally see me. "Fix this," he hissed at me. "You are a cop. Fix this." I shook my head. "I am not a cop tonight, Dad. I am the victim, and I am pressing charges." I turned my back on him. I walked over to Stuart. He took my hand. His grip was rough and warm and real. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I am ready." We walked down the stairs. I stopped next to Natalie. She was standing by the podium, looking at her bare hand. "You going to be okay?" I asked. Natalie looked up. Her eyes were clear. "I have a good lawyer," she said, "and I have the truth. I will be fine. Thank you. Harper." "For what?" "For catching me," she said. Again. I nodded. I looked at my mother. She was standing frozen on the stage, watching the police handcuff her husband and son. "Mom," I said. She looked at me. "Call me when you are ready to tell the truth to the judge," I said. "Until then, you are on your own." She nodded slowly. It was the first decision she had made for herself in 40 years. I took Stuart's arm, and we walked toward the exit. We walked past the half-eaten cake, past the melting ice sculpture, past the abandoned champagne glasses. We walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the wet pavement in bursts of red and blue. It was not a pretty scene. It was chaotic and loud. But to me, it looked like freedom. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and ozone. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for 16 years, the weight of being the invisible daughter, the bad investment, the spare part was gone. "You know," Stuart said, opening the car door for me, "we are going to have to find a new place for dinner. I think the shrimp cocktail is officially evidence." I laughed. It was a real laugh, light and unburdened. "I know a diner," I said. "The coffee is terrible, but the bill is honest." "Sounds perfect," Stuart said. I got into the car. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the lights of Hawthorne Crest fading into the distance. I saw the silhouette of the place where my family had tried to sell my soul. They had paid for my brother's tuition. They had told me I did not need degrees. They had told me to find a husband. Well, I had found a husband. I had found a career. And tonight, I had found the one thing they could never buy. Steal or borrow. I had found my name. And I was never letting anyone sign it for me again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story out to even more people. Your support means the world.